Bomb bay doors open. Bombs away!
April 8th, 1943. 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Oberleutnant Rolf Hermiken's smirk as he watched the ungainly silhouettes climbing laboriously toward his formation. Through the crystal-clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5, the veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26 studied the American fighters making their combat debut over occupied Europe. "Die armies have sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, unable to suppress his laughter at the sight of the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolt struggling for altitude. Below them, 16 P-47C, Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group lumbered upward in tight formation, their 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney R 2800 double Wasp engines straining against their 7-ton weight. To German pilots accustomed to the sleek Spitfires and nimble Soviet fighters, these corpulent American machines appeared almost comical. Barrel-shaped fuselages topped with greenhouse canopies, wings that seemed too small for their massive bodies, propellers that dwarfed anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. What Hermiken didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling like wolves above could have imagined, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within 18 months, these flying milk bottles would transform from objects of derision into instruments of terror, their 8 AN/M2 Browning machine guns becoming the most feared sound in German skies. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those broad wings. 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute, enough concentrated firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The transformation began that April morning when Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. The former Eagle Squadron veteran, who had transferred from RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier, understood what his men didn't yet know, that survival in the P-47 required abandoning everything they thought they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt represented a radical departure from conventional fighter design philosophy. While the Germans had pursued lightweight interceptors optimized for climb and turn performance, Republic aviation had created something unprecedented, a high-altitude juggernaut that used mass, power and firepower to redefine the rules of aerial warfare. Among the 56 American pilots spread across the French sky that morning were men who would become legends, future aces whose names would strike fear into Luftwaffe hearts. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices in an untested machine, facing the most experienced fighter force in the world. The Germans had been fighting continuously since 1939, with veterans of Poland, France, Britain and Russia. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This story is about how industrial logic defeated tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality merged into overwhelming superiority, and how German pilots' laughter turned to terror as they discovered what synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had emerged from a June 1940 panic. As German fighters swept across France, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Corps. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of matching the Luftwaffe's best. What Kartveli designed instead was a monster that redefined the possible. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The massive turbo-supercharger system, with its complex ducting running through the rear fuselage, gave it an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots approaching it for the first time invariably asked the same question: "This thing actually flies?" Not only did it fly, it flew like nothing else at altitude. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower, could maintain full power at 27,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air. The turbo supercharger, fed by exhaust gases, delivered sea-level performance in the stratosphere, where the air was too thin for conventional superchargers. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents between September 1942 and January 1943. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in the first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, and dove with such enthusiasm that pilots discovered compressibility, their controls freezing as shock waves formed on the wings. But those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first combat encounters in April and May 1943 confirmed every German prejudice. The P-47s couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109s, couldn't match their nimble handling at medium altitudes. Luftwaffe pilots quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled, forcing turning fights where agility mattered more than firepower. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indianer, fat targets pretending to be warriors. The statistics seem to confirm German confidence. In their first month of operations, the American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, observing from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening in those early encounters that German intelligence failed to notice. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed incredible punishment before falling. One aircraft returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes, damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant systems, shrugged off hits that would have stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. More significantly, when P-47s did get their guns on target, the results were catastrophic. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery created a convergence zone of destruction that German pilots had never experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early warfighters or the cannon with limited ammunition, the American fighter could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Forges-les-Eaux, France. It involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from escort duty when they were bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from 2/Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers, taking catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered, hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit, the engine cowling was torn away, and fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, tried to bail out, but discovered the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unknown pilot from 2/JG-26, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never definitively identified this pilot, though several names have been proposed based on German combat reports from that day. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. Then the German repositioned and fired again, this time with only his machine guns, the cannon ammunition exhausted. The German pilot pulled alongside, staring in disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly, young, blonde, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something approaching fear. The German repositioned and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston with its engine failing on the runway. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving combat reports from 2nd Section of Jagdgeschwader 26, initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver and survived. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, the 56th Fighter Group commander, had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. Don't turn with them, don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight, use your power, use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could achieve even in a vertical dive. This speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker, Bud Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in traditional dogfights, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, reaching speeds that made deflection shooting impossible for defending Germans. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead, the combined firepower creating an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. The true revelation of American firepower came during the August 17, 1943, dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that date. This mission would demonstrate both the P-47's limitations, its range even with drop tanks, and its terrifying effectiveness when employed properly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft positioning to attack B-17s with their heavy cannon and rocket armament. The twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Mi-110s who survived, later recounted in a POW interrogation. The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down. Destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, tail severed, the crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 110 became nothing. 8. Messerschmitt 100s and 10s were destroyed in less than a minute. The German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At convergence distance, typically set at 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each travelling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a revelation of American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could maintain fire for over half a minute. The standard combat load mixed armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and standard ball ammunition in patterns designed to both destroy and ignite. Lieutenant Colonel Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down. They explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality about the P-47. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. German fighters, relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. The BMW 801 engine, powerful at medium altitudes, was gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both eastern and western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The German High Command ordered an immediate investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report, delivered to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring in November 1943, was sobering. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier. Its armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, 1/2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and still return home. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47 D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter with broad chord blades that bit into the air like massive oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy faster in level flight. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb." We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year. The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried 2 108-gallon wing tanks, or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when loaded, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms immediately after dropping tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to stop the American daylight campaign. But this required flying through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. German pilots developed a grudging respect that bordered on fear for the big American fighters. Major Günther Rahl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He later recalled in a post-war interview, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." The escort missions revealed another P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters operated at maximum power settings that consumed fuel rapidly, the big American radials could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while maintaining enough fuel for combat and return. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over long-range escort duties in spring 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would make them the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition began in earnest in April 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage, a bomb load equal to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them Jabos, fighter bombers, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe discovered how completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported, "The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters from our Gruppe. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain." In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armoured vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armour, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armour and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in the Pacific theatre. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's qualities were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th, developed tactics specifically for the Pacific. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, shooting down 6 enemy planes himself in a single mission, earning him the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, accustomed to fighting nimble but fragile American fighters, were unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and durability. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart." The P-47N, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This variant would escort B-29s to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon. Perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47's evolution came in its encounters with German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with its 540 miles per hour top speed, should have been untouchable by propeller-driven fighters. But Thunderbolt pilots discovered they could catch jets in two situations: during takeoff and landing when jets were most vulnerable, and in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the jet in level flight. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer's guns opened up at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report noted, "The enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 8.50 caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft." By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed specifically to counter German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting power to 2,800 horsepower and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to intercept even jets under certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron equipped with P-47s, shot down two Me-262s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed. "The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery, and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them." The ultimate demonstration of American industrial might came during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other aircraft. A captured German pilot, brought to the command post, pointed at the burning aircraft and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking's response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force. He pointed to the flight line where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk disappeared. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D-40S filled the flight line, flown in from depots in England. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots in Bodenplatte, including many irreplaceable instructors and squadron leaders. These losses they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all replaced within a week. The numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone contained 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Yet American workers, many of them women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with precision that exceeded peacetime standards. The ammunition production was equally staggering, Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several ammunition plants, produced 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge was manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring reliable feeding through the synchronized gun mechanisms. The fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal flight, up to 300 gallons per hour in combat with water injection engaged. The 9th Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly by late 1944, all of it shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves products of American mass production. Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, more than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours total time by war's end. The quality showed in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery and tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's capabilities and limitations. They knew their aircraft systems intimately, having studied technical manuals that German pilots never received. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, exemplified the American training advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, studied gun camera film from actual combat. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Josef Priller, the same pilot who had mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials seeking to boost morale. His statement, deemed too demoralizing for publication, revealed the complete transformation in German attitudes. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents: unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, it's gone forever. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage, and courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were cratered ruins. But even with aircraft and fuel, German pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations that owned every altitude from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded, the wing separated. I barely escaped. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire staffel. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete. German pilots developed what medical officers called Jabo fever, physical symptoms of stress appearing when Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47s. The distinctive thunder of approaching Thunderbolts caused panic among ground troops, who knew that survival meant finding cover immediately. The final statistics of P-47 operations defied comprehension. In Europe, 3,752 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 3,315 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 86,000 railway cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 6,000 armoured fighting vehicles destroyed, 68,000 trucks destroyed, 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. In the Pacific, 697 Japanese aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 1,500 vehicles destroyed, 150 locomotives destroyed, countless barges, ships, and installations. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. The Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.6 to 1 kill ratio in aerial combat, while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter-bomber. Behind these numbers lay the human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against Western Allied forces. Many fell to the concentrated fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of training that Germany could never replace. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot had over 200. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center at Oberursel, captured Allied pilots were debriefed by German intelligence. The records, captured in 1945, revealed German assessments of Allied aircraft. The file on the P-47, updated continuously throughout the war, showed the complete reversal of opinion. April 1943. Large, unmaneuverable fighter, inferior to German types in all performance parameters except dive speed. Machine gun armament insufficient against cannon-armed fighters. Assessment: minimal threat. December 1943. Exceptional high-altitude performance. Extreme structural strength. Firepower increasingly problematic. Pilots showing improved tactics. Assessment: significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944. Dominant fighter bomber. Superior to all German types above 20,000 feet. Firepower devastating against all target types. Structural strength makes shoot-down extremely difficult. Assessment: critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter bomber of the war. Combination of firepower, durability, and performance unmatched. Pilot quality exceptional. Assessment: unsurvivable in direct engagement. In 1985, at a reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former adversaries met in peace. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His response, recorded on video, captured the complete transformation. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat," we said. "They built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win. They were right." The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable, the visibility excellent, the controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced, yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The P-47's design represented American industrial philosophy perfectly, brute force engineering backed by unlimited resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount could withstand 12 G-forces. The control cables were doubled throughout with automatic backup systems. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel of engineering. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, fed through electric boost motors to prevent jamming during high G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude. Each gun had its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized. The convergence was adjustable from 150 to 400 yards, allowing pilots to optimize for their preferred engagement range. Even after the war, some German veterans maintained that the P-47 won through quantity, not quality, that German fighters were technically superior but overwhelmed by numbers. The combat records tell a different story. In engagements where numbers were equal, P-47s consistently prevailed. The heavy machine gun armament, dismissed as inferior to cannon, proved more effective in actual combat. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed why. Cannon shells, while individually more destructive, required precise aim and had limited ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds total. The P-47's weapons created a probability cloud of bullets that guaranteed hits even with imperfect aim. At typical engagement ranges, a 2-second burst put at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, enough to ensure destruction. The ammunition itself was superior. American .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds used a delayed action fuse that ensured penetration before detonation. The incendiary compound burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite aluminum structure. German 20mm shells, while heavier, often exploded on surface contact, causing spectacular but sometimes superficial damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight of 10,000 pounds exceeded the gross weight of some twin-engine fighters. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war. Its weapons delivered more firepower than a squad of infantry. Yet it was built by the thousands, flown by kids barely out of high school, and maintained under combat conditions by mechanics who learned their trade in weeks. The transformation of German opinion from mockery to terror took less than 2 years. In that time, the flying milk bottle became the most feared aircraft in the Luftwaffe's experience. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without flinching spoke of P-47s in hushed tones decades after the war. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits among other legendary fighters. Its placard lists specifications and battle honors. But the real story is told by a small display case containing spent .50 caliber shells and a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. Below the display is a quote from an unnamed German pilot, taken from a 1945 interrogation report. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you and you ceased to exist. The laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of lead. German pilots had laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.